At least for a night in Minnesota where the baseball world and all eyes were on Gerrit Cole, he was good. I mean, he wasn't brilliant. I mean, but he was good. I mean, his command was off in a little space. If you're concerned about RPMs, they were down by 59 when you look at his four-seam fastball. They were uptick on the changeup at about 125. So minuscule when you look at it. There wasn't this precipitous drop where you're looking at his spin rate or his RPMs being back to where he was as a member of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Had the 9 strikeouts, didn't plunk Josh Donaldson, just embarrassed him in the first at bat, and then gave him a big stare down. The Yankees offense was there, at least for a night. I don't know if it ends the storyline forever, but at least for a night, Gerrit Cole was very, very good. Even with all the pressure and the weight on his shoulders, I said yesterday on BNY, I say yesterday here, I thought it was probably the most pressurized individual start that Gerrit Cole has faced here in New York as a Yankee, or maybe over his entire career. I mean, put the playoffs aside, I'm talking about him, because basically his reputation was on the line last night. Imagine we come on the airwaves this morning and Gerrit Cole goes 3 innings, the spin rate is down, he gets knocked around by the Minnesota Twins, the Yankees lose one. What are we doing now? We're talking about the world crashing and falling. Gerrit Cole, the competitor. Buck Showalter said yesterday, I believe in the competitor of Gerrit Cole. Not saying that they turned, the spider tack turned him into this unbelievable guy. He was already a really good pitcher,
Of course.
but he took it to another level. Well, last night in Minnesota, he was good. I mean, gets his 7th win of the season, 9 strikeouts, 6 innings of work. Like I mentioned, his command was off a little bit, but you're going to take that, and he answered the call.
Yeah, you got to commend Cole for how he came out, and I think what the extra mustard that he put on the fastball to Josh Donaldson, I mean, throwing some of his hardest stuff of the year to Donaldson, I mean, that was the response you want to see. A guy who said that he was bothered, by the fact that he got called out, low-hanging fruit, all that stuff. Like, he brought it to Josh Donaldson, didn't have to hit him to make his point. And I really appreciated how Cole pitched last night. But honestly, if you're going to give out, MVPs, of these last couple days or this last week, you got to hand it to the Twins, Moose, because I don't know what's real. Gerrit Cole should probably be able to do that to that Twins lineup at any time, anywhere, with anything on the baseball or nothing on the baseball. I can't tell what I'm really watching here. I know I saw Cole be an awesome competitor last night. I appreciated how he handled himself, and I thought that was an excellent response. He got the spotlight off him for at least a little bit. Like Aaron Boone said, we don't really know where this story is going to go, but for a while where Gerrit Cole was in danger of being the poster boy of this story, at least he can get the dogs off of him a little bit and kind of quiet this sort of noise around him with what he did last night. And then the Yankees offense comes alive. The last 2 games, they put up 17 runs. I mean, it took them 5 games, the previous 5, to get to 16 runs. So, I can't tell what I'm watching. Am I watching a team that really has figured something out here, and they are just, clicking again, and this is a turning point of the season, and, things are all well in Yankee land? Or am I watching them play an opponent where they are just overmatched? I mean, the Twins are terrible baseball team. It is awful to watch the Twins. And maybe that is exactly what the Yankees needed. They just needed a soft landing spot where they could beat up on a bad baseball team and try to get themselves right. So I can't make a big conclusion here. All I know is that I liked what I saw from the Yankees outside of Brooks Kriske last night. I liked what I saw. I think they needed this, and most of all, obviously, Cole needed it because the Sharks were circling.
Yeah, the Sharks were circling on Boone before the series started, and the Sharks were circling on Gerrit Cole before his start last night. 105-37. You want to say, well, what is that? Well, that's the Yankees' record. Thanks to Joel Sherman. Post had it this morning. 105-37, the Yankees' record against Minnesota since 2002. I mean, it's embarrassing. That's including the playoffs. How the Yankees have owned the Minnesota Twins, even when the Twins are good, and they're not good now. So you'd be screaming to the high heaven. Certainly, I would be, Maggie, as a Yankee fan, if they weren't taking care of business against the Minnesota Twins. So I'll give them credit. They needed to find ways to win baseball games. They have, right? The last couple. We'll see what Mike King is on tonight as they wrap up the series in Minnesota against the Twins. They got a strange off day tomorrow, but you'll take this rather than the opposite, because the opposite then, if Cole gets knocked around, say the Yankees lose 2 straight to Minnesota, we're talking about the job security of Aaron Boone. So, yeah, sometimes the right opponent at the right time, soft landing spot. We joked around about it earlier in the week. I mean, for Aaron Boone, who was, after the sweep by the Boston Red Sox, looking at the schedule, schedule and seeing it's Minnesota, he thanked to the good Lord above that it's the Minnesota Twins that the Yankees are facing next, and they've got the offense going here a little bit. Stanton with a couple home runs, Judge with a home run, Andujar has picked it up. Your guy, I know you're a big Miguel Andujar guy. He's clearly done some things. Brett Gardner as well. Offensively, they've done some things against Minnesota too. Strange way they get there, but for the first time, the Yankees win a game this year in which they give up more than 5 runs, right? It ends up being a 9-6 final now. It's a strange way they got there because the Minnesota Twins scored 4 runs in the bottom half of the 9th inning. That was a 9-2 game. So it doesn't really count in the stat book, but I saw people tweeting it out after the game. Well, good to see the Yankees finally win this type of game. Not really the dynamic that you're looking at when we're talking about. We're talking about more of a comeback than anything else. Those were kind of, the game was over. Minnesota scores 4 runs. It's 9-2. It ends up being a 9-6 final, but that's for the record book for the Yankees, who have not won those type of games. But offensively, the Yankees have gotten healthy. They've taken advantage of a really bad opponent, and give Cole credit. He was, kind of calm, cool, collected, very businesslike on the mound, had that glare on him. He was clearly bothered and ticked off by the Donaldson comments. He didn't answer that question well. We went down that road, and yesterday and last night, he answered the call. He did. And that's all you want to see. You feel a lot better about Gerrit Cole this morning than you probably did last Friday, all this week leading into that start last night in Minnesota, about what exactly you're going to get from Gerrit Cole, with all the eyes, whether it be on him touching the bill of his cap, touching his hair, touching his leg, wherever it might be. You know what? The spin rate was down a little bit, didn't take away from his effectiveness, and he was a winning starter.
Yeah, this was not a given. Now, put Cole aside for a second, but just like the Yankees coming in and being dominant against the Twins, that record is embarrassing for how the Yankees have dominated them.
105-37.
I know, it's silly. But the crazy thing about that, though, is we wouldn't have even really been talking about any kind of possibility the Yankees would, flounder here if they hadn't just been swept by the Tigers. The Tigers are also a terrible team. The Yankees went into Detroit and looked absolutely lifeless. So, that was not a given a week ago. And so what they've shown now is that they really have found themselves, and they found an opponent, and they could avoid disaster on a lot of different levels here, because it just would have gotten worse and worse and worse. You mentioned it, Boone, for the offense, for Gerrit Cole, if they didn't have a good response here. There's another part of the Cole story, though, that I'd like to point out, because I think that he deserves some credit here. I think that the way that he's handled this is actually, we can mock him for the pregnant pause, and not being totally prepared for what seemed like an inevitable question that he was going to get about spider tack or what have you. But, to be honest, he's pretty classy in how he's handled all of this, especially Josh Donaldson. He could have come into that post game last night and basically been like, nah, bleep you and you, and I save my best stuff for you, and don't, take my name out your mouth and all that stuff. And he really didn't do that. Not that I was expecting Cole to be that kind of guy, but you could understand if he would have been ticked off and basically saying, listen, I know this story isn't going anywhere, and I also understand that as part of the executive council of Major League Baseball, these are conversations that we should be having amongst our own union. Moose, there is a part of this that becomes the player versus player and driving a wedge between players when you're going into a year where you're going to be renegotiating your entire collective bargaining agreement. That is not insignificant. Who does that help? The owners. Of course it helps the owners. So to have the players themselves, unfortunately, because pitchers and hitters are diametrically opposed to one another, they're going to have some kind of conflict. But the fact that they would be, publicly feuding with each other, that's the last thing that the players should be doing going into this collective bargaining agreement. They've got to be like a united front here if they're going to really present, a challenge to the owners, because this is going to be a hell of a fight for them. Both sides going to be a hell of a fight. And so I thought for Cole and how he sort of gracefully handled this post game was a real credit to him, and kind of keeping the bigger picture in mind here, which is this looming, labor situation.
Yeah, for sure. And he could have also, he handled himself very, very well. Outside of the pregnant pause after the Davidoff question. And even if he had just listened to the answer, he handled himself really well too, because he didn't want to get caught in a lie with his pants down and gave you the non-answer. But in essence, he answered the question. And yeah, I don't disagree. I think you're seeing the frustration from hitters across Major League Baseball because of for some guys, they're just not performing. And they're looking at, I know offense has had a little bit of an uptick here as we've moved along. It hasn't been completely pitcher dominant, but that was really the storyline for the first 6-7 weeks. So you've seen some frustration, Maggie, and yeah, I think you need to have a unified front, and we'll get into the Alonso comments in a little bit. But you need to have
Pete just threw that Molotov cocktail right in there.
You have to have a unified front if you're the players. Yeah, I think for Gerrit Cole, I think he handled himself well. Even Donaldson last night after the game said, "Listen, I'm paraphrasing here. I know Gerrit Cole's not the face of it, and he's not the only one doing it, but." I brought him up in essence. There are others. Just keep an eye on what the spin rates are for guys and if there is a precipitous drop-off. So Gerrit Cole was putting it in a very, very uncomfortable situation of being kind of the face of this and the face of Spider Tack and the use of it and where his RPMs and where his spin rate is and why was it down last week? Well, it was a little bit down last night, but not significantly like it was last Thursday against the Tampa Bay Rays. And he was effective last night, and he answered the call. I think for a guy as much pressure on his shoulders last night, you learned a little something about Gerrit Cole. We're going to continue. I don't think this storyline's going anywhere, Maggie. I don't think it's going to. I think if he has another down start where you see the spin rate down, I think it's going to continue. I don't think all of a sudden after one good Gerrit Cole start that all of a sudden he's taken off the hot seat. But I think you learned something about him, because that was a very, very highly pressurized spot last night in Minnesota against a bad team. I get it.
Right.
I get it. I get the Twins are not great, but still, he went out there and he was really, really good. And I think you learned about Gerrit Cole and his competitive nature after everything that's happened with him in the last 48 hours.
Well, and he, in a way, kind of helped diffuse a bit of the situation, too. Because, to be honest, and I know we talked about it yesterday and about, would you hit Josh Donaldson and Moose, you kind of like the vigilante justice there.
Yeah,
and
hit him in the rear end.
But, the thing about that is that makes the story bigger. And that's the last thing that Gerrit Cole would want. And he
more
sort
of an
of
old school look at it.
He sort of diffuses the situation as much as he possibly can by going out and pitching well, specifically pitching well against Donaldson. So, he gets his sort of revenge that way, and probably a lot sweeter than hitting him. And he sort of makes this story, maybe, at least his involvement of the story, kind of dissipates a little bit. And, again, it's like the players versus the players here. And what's the ironic part of it is the players will be pit against the players as everyone's trying to sniff out who's got what, who's using what and who's got the better advantage and who's cheating and who's not cheating. Meanwhile, it's up to baseball to enforce this rule. The players are going to be the ones who are going to be put against each other here. But it's actually baseball who's their responsibility to enforce this rule. They're the ones who we're going to see too. Buster only had the report. Later on this month, they're going to start doing something, checking guys, being a little bit more proactive about trying to make sure the foreign substances are off the ball. Boone said he does think he's going to
get patted down before
they get a heads up. I know it's going to be like frisked, before you go out there. But whatever you got to do to try to maintain the integrity of the game and show fans that you're taking this seriously and all that stuff. But ultimately, the players are the ones who get caught up in the crosshairs because it's their game and they're the ones playing it. But it's actually baseball's responsibility to make sure that this doesn't get out of hand.
Well, I get it, but blame goes all the way around. It's also the players that are doing it, right? So the players are doing it. They want baseball to enforce it, right? But we know, historically speaking, Maggie, unless baseball gets caught with their pants down, they really do not go out and stringently enforce a lot things. We've seen it.
They're reactionary.
Time and time again.
I would describe them as reactionary.
Right. They do not. Unless something happens. And that's where, Maggie, I really believe that, baseball, unless there were those pieces like we saw in The Athletic and I don't think there would have been the reaction that we've gotten unless we've had those investigative pieces that we had into what pitchers are using in Major League Baseball, because that's just the history of Major League Baseball. They react. They're not proactive. They're not progressive. They react when they know that something's going the wrong way.
Well, and they had a big no comment for Pete Alonso, and he now is part of the story. We can get into exactly what he said, because now this becomes what it kind of all boiled back down to. We've talked about this scandal and the sticky stuff scandal and said, if you really want to trace back the beginning of this, you got to go back 30 years. You got to start with steroids. You got to go through all these different tilting of who's got the advantage. I know spitballs and stuff go back 100 years, but I'm saying if you want to really get yourself up to speed on this, this didn't start a year ago. This didn't start 2 years ago. This didn't start with the invention of Spider Tack. This has been going on for a long time. But the idea that the baseball changed is really kind of what's again, at the center of this, too. So it's all connected. And, yeah, and Pete just lit a fuse. I love the baseball. No comment.
We'll get
I bet.
Yeah, we'll get into the Alonso comment. So we do know this. The KY ball came into play in 1989 when Major League came out.